David, thank you so much for joining me.
Good. It's good to be here, Chris.
Thank you. So I'm fascinated by founder CEOs, and one of the things I'm very curious about is experiences that you've had, whether if it's childhood or maybe more recently, that have shaped you into the person you are today.
Yeah, I agree. I think your childhood can really have a significant influence on what you become or the things that you attempt to achieve. My childhood was maybe a little bit different than most. I had a dad who was a businessman and a mom who was a pure artist. So she was like an opera singer and actress and musician. Those two combined led to a progeny who was both, I'd say, quantitatively inclined and had more of a pragmatic approach, but also fairly creative and would think outside the box. And I think that's a good description of how I've lived my life generally, just like looking at things in probably a kind of an skewed way in terms of not the way that everyone else does, but applying deep mathematical quantitative rigor in order to find if that way is actually an intelligent way. So, we saw this kind of throughout my young life, and also just having that mindset and that creativity led to a number of instances where I was able to jump into things, create a solution that maybe other people didn't really think about or take a novel way of approaching it. And oftentimes maybe getting in too much trouble doing that, but figuring it out along the way.
What are one of those stories maybe you caught yourself in some trouble with?
Yeah, I'd say generally my approach to finding actuarial science was a little bit of a, maybe not as much trouble, but a little bit goofy. Exploring my more creative side, I was a history major in college and really had not much desire to get into the mathematical side of things. And what ended up happening was in college, they forced you to take a math class. And so I took the most kind of philosophical sounding math class that I could take called formal logic. And it turns out that that's actually like an extremely intense kind of abstract math class, and fell in love with it. And that's when I first found out that I really liked pure mathematics and mathematics in general. And so seeing that, I think was both pragmatic and novel, was I just went straight to the registrar and switched my major to mathematics. And when they asked, which track I wanted to be on, again, I was very direct and pragmatic and just said, whichever one gets me to graduate the fastest, because I was like in my junior year of college. and I hadn't
You didn't need another 4 years.
Yeah, exactly. So I ended up taking like 24 credit hours, which I set a record at the school for doing that.
One semester.
In one semester, yeah. In the summers, I was taking 18 credit hours. Again, this is just like seeing the way and like just taking it, even though not many people would have done it otherwise, but figuring out a way to get it all done. But then there was a girl who asked me, because I was in all these classes, she's like, are you taking the actuarial exam? Because that was the track that I was on. And I didn't know what that word meant. I didn't know what an actuary was, but I said, absolutely I am. And that's actually how I became an actuary. So that one maybe didn't get me into trouble, but it was a little bit of a different way of approaching things, and maybe a little bit more goofy and creative than what a true pragmatist would employ.
I'm going to go back to your parents, because it sounds like one, a business person, I'm making assumptions about him and the work he did. And then your mom, an artist, you said opera singer, I'm making assumptions about her. It's fair to say they're fairly different. I'm sure, they have their shared stuff, but, in ways they're probably very different.
Yes. Yeah.
So what now, when you're a kid, you don't maybe realize that the influence of that. And can you look back clearly now and say, oh, wow, I grabbed those attributes from my mom. I grabbed those attributes from my dad.
Yes, absolutely. My dad, he was much more of it. He was a salesman, but not the way a salesman you think of, like the traditional, like super charismatic, like, slimy. Not that all salesmen are slimy, but they can be. He sold jet engines, which is a pretty interesting thing to do. He'd buy from like tier 1 airlines and sell and lease them to tier 2 airlines. Very honest, very high integrity guy, and got to witness a lot of his sales. And it was extremely matter of fact. And he would approach it with the confidence of someone who knew what they were doing, had the high ground, knew his reputation was very strong in the industry, and would just sell things accordingly. And I really admired that. And it's something that I wanted to, I really desired to have that carry forward in how I went into business and really how I did anything in my life. Having that level of confidence, but not arrogance, but the confidence that stems from someone's expertise in a particular space and being able to command a sales cycle or whatever it is was an admirable trait that I was very resolute in developing in myself. And so what that resulted in is anything that I would put my mind to, especially in the fields of mathematics and actuarial science, I wanted to make sure that I had such a strong foundation in it that if I was ever in a debate with another person, I was going to generally win because I knew what I was talking about. Now, that doesn't mean I can't learn anything. I'm open to having conversations where, I could be wrong, but I want to go in with as much information as possible so that I can be confident, at least in the things that I'm saying.
Awesome. And how about some of the attributes from your mom?
My mom, I got the creativity from. I remember when I was a kid, my mom would say things that everyone thought were just completely ludicrous. I remember when we were in Blockbuster. You probably remember Blockbuster.
Yeah.
And I was like 5 years old, and I think we had just gotten a personal computer, which no one really had. And we were walking around in Blockbuster, and she said to me, one day, we'll be able to watch all of these from our computer from home. This store won't exist. And my dad kind of like looked at her sideways, and he ended up asking some of his friends who are in the computer world about it. And they said, impossible. The memory required it could, and the bandwidth that you would require from an internet standpoint, because I think we were in like 28K modems back then. We didn't even have 56, maybe 56K was just coming out at that time. And the idea was just ludicrous. And so that audacious thinking of just like going completely outside the box and imagining a whole new world is something that I really admire about my mom. And it's definitely not the first time she said something crazy that I immediately think is a little insane. And then I'm like, wait a second, it's not possible right now, but maybe in the future. So she's a little kooky, but I simultaneously admire my mother's ability to really think outside the box, because I don't think there is a box in my mom's head.
All the better. Well, yeah. That's what produces a entrepreneur like yourself.
Yeah, I'm thankful for it.
Yeah, that's awesome. How about any? I know you worked in insurance before starting the insurance business at two different places. One more of a legacy company, and the other a startup. What was the moment you were like, you know what, I can do this? Did you always want to be an entrepreneur? How about a little bit of the entrepreneurial journey?
I never grew up thinking about being an entrepreneur. It never really came up. We were always just taught to think for ourselves and execute in whatever way we thought was the right way to get to it. And so I ended up starting my working career actually at a company called NCCI, the National Council on Compensation Insurance. And it was there that I saw this kind of massive small commercial space that was untapped. And when I learned why it was untapped, mainly because the insurance companies couldn't make money doing it, the agents didn't want to touch it because it took too much time, said, we should just create a company that used data and technology just to make it stupidly efficient for everyone. And that was the idea. And after that, I would just go to various companies to try and learn how to do that. And so it was a little bit of my mom and dad's mindsets coming together. This kind of audacious idea of no one is doing it. It's technically impossible right now, but it can be done with the data and technology. And then pragmatic side of just diving headfirst and learning how to do it. I think that's, again, similar to the mathematical background back in college when it was like, okay, I have a deep passion for this. Just throw yourself completely at it. Don't sleep most nights because you're working all the time, but still just go do it. You'll sleep one day. And so that's what I ended up doing. And thankfully I was just blessed with opportunity after opportunity to learn in these different fields and eventually start Coterie.
So you started Coterie about back in 2008?
2018.
And 2018. And what are some of these moments where you're like, and then moments where you're like, this is great? You could share a couple of stories, like the two different sides of entrepreneurship.
So the first kind of big moment was when we were starting Coterie. So I have 5 kids right now, ranging from 1 to 10, 4 boys and 1 girl. So my house is it's a lot of fun.
I got 2 kids. That's amazing.
Oh, nice, nice. Kids are great, man. For everyone who's listening, I highly recommend having kids. They teach you a lot about yourself. Probably the first thing you'll realize, like as soon as you have the first one, is just how selfish you are. Like, wow, my life really revolves around myself, and now I have this other creature. So good. It's a good thing to do. But in the beginning, things were going well at ClearCover, which I was the second employee there, helped them start, and then had this idea for Coterie, or at least had the idea for Coterie. And now it was time to really start going. And my wife, who is taking care of our 2 kids, was pregnant with our third, and actually in our third trimester with the third. So, we're rounding third base coming to home. We have some potential investors who are really interested in what we're doing. And we had decided, all right, we're going to move from Chicago to Cincinnati to start Coterie. And we were at our going away party on a Saturday. And while we're there, we get a call from one of the investors, kind of like the lead guy. Pick up, I'm like, hey, how's it going? He's like, oh, good. He's like, look, David, we really like you, really like the idea. But look, we know you want to change this whole small commercial thing, but we really want you instead to just start a digital agency. Don't try and create new products. Don't try and do the carrier thing. Like it's just too much risk. Yeah, and a digital agency is a really great business model. And don't get me wrong. I respect digital agencies, but what we wanted to build at Coterie was a way to help digital agencies, a way to help the brokers, to help the agents, to help the wholesalers, and to just create another competitor to them. Honestly, I didn't think we could improve upon what most people had already done. And so I said, look, that's not consistent with the vision. Here's why. And he said, yeah, I hear you. We're out. So
You thought you had money, and then
yeah,
you don't have it till it's in the bank account.
Exactly. So I, went back into the party, finished it out, and then drove home with my wife and told her the news. She's like, okay, well, I guess we'll figure it out. So we moved that week to Cincinnati. Very hard to try and find new investors. I actually had a team that I met, and they started working for a couple months. And then a couple months later, on August 20th, 2018, ended up agreeing to terms with a completely new investor for the first round at Coterie. And that night, my wife goes into labor with our third child and gives birth the next morning on August 21st. So that was it's kind of like all the things at once,
You covered the positive, the negative, and the positive all in one story. That's great.
Yeah, it was a big win, but definitely hard times. And we're thankful for the hard times. The hard times make us stronger, more resilient.
How about advice to people founding a company and raising money?
Raising money, I'll take that in 2 different ones. So I'll do raising money first. Raising money, a lot of people think the end goal is a very high valuation. I'd be very careful. I care far more about the investors you bring on at the right terms than valuation. And the reason I say both, the investors and the right terms, and I'm not talking valuation terms, I'm talking like liquidation preferences, those types of things, is because even really, really good people can be turned into very not so good people if they're incentivized poorly. And sometimes you got to take bad terms. I understand, just to keep the company surviving, but I'll take good investors at good terms with low valuation over okay investors at okay terms with a high valuation. Valuation is a vanity metric. You're going to pay that price once. Anyway, at the end of the day, when you're actually exiting, that's when valuation matters. Terms matter at that point too, but that's when valuation actually matters. Yeah.
That's good stuff.
Thanks.
Now I'm hoping to move into. I'm curious on your philosophy on artificial intelligence. And so first, I want to start with your philosophy generally on artificial intelligence, like broadly with society, and then in the insurance business, in your business. So let's do kind of broadly social impact. Your thoughts on AI.
Yeah, and just for the sake of the deep AI nerds, I'll separate this into, generative AI versus general AI. So there's like the typical AI ML that's been around for years and years and years. Gradient boosted machines, random forest, GLM, stuff like that, all iterative models where you're constantly learning from itself. And then we have, generative AI, which is the LLM stuff that we're seeing now, combined with other models. It's all pretty useful, pretty neat stuff. I won't talk about our application. I'll go into more of the philosophy. So some people have been pushing back on this stuff, saying that, they're really concerned that it's going to displace a bunch of people from a job standpoint. And I was talking about this the other day at a conference, and I said, look, about 120, 150 years ago, nearly 80% of our employment base was agrarian. They're farmers, people working on farms, all that kind of stuff. And I asked the room, I was like, who here wants to give up your day job and go back to the farm? Raise your hand. And no one did. What? They don't want to work in cow manure and wake up at 5 a.m. So yeah, I said, okay, we'll realize the fact that, with the advent of the combine and tractor and gas powered machines and engines and all this stuff, they were able to do the work of, 50 to 100 people with these machines. And that really created a completely new way to do things, which opened up a new age of computers. Well, not computers, yeah, but like eventually to a new applications of our abilities. And I think what we're doing with AI, Gen AI, is going to be similar. We're going to be able to open up a whole new part of society with new products that we can't even fathom right now. And we're going to replace a lot of the mentally mundane tasks that we do just without even thinking about it, right? And those jobs as well that are kind of lower skilled, not as like, just like back in the agrarian days, walking down a row and planting seeds, like, hey, you can use a machine for that. We're going to replace a lot of those jobs, and there's going to be a whole new set of jobs in the future. So I don't know if it's going to be 80% of the jobs over a 200-year period, but I imagine we will see a very different workforce in 150, 200 years than we see now. Now, what that means, getting into a little bit more of the philosophical, maybe less economical side of that, is, the ethics associated with AI. That is
How about like a moment in time where it's like the jobs are shifting, but they're not quite all figured out yet. So there's pain there.
yeah, there's going to be displacement in that. And that's probably where we're going to have to have, I think we're going to be able to see some entrepreneurs take advantage of that, just like entrepreneurs took advantage of it earlier. We saw people build a lot of new structures and employ farmers who, weren't farming anymore, and they needed some work to do, some type of manual labor, whatever it was. I think we're going to be able to see people who capitalize on this surplus of talent that is falling out of the workforce. And by the way, it's not happening right now. It's too soon. It's going to take years for this to really create significant displacement, right? Like introducing the combine, within 5 years, most people weren't using the combine, right? Most farmers weren't using the combine. It takes a long time to change everything. I think about LLMs almost as like a Ferrari, right? Like everyone now has a Ferrari, but do you actually have a Autobahn to drive the Ferrari on, or are you still using cow pastures, right? So like most of the legacy companies have this data infrastructure where they can't use the Ferrari to its full potential. They basically have this like back road that's really broken up, and maybe not all the ways connected, and then there's a ferry. Yeah. So it's going to take a little bit of time for us to really see LLMs become ubiquitous in the products out there. I would wager that less than 1% of companies have a generative AI application in production right now. Now, once that hits, in 10 to 20 years, that may hit 50%, right? There'll probably be a breaking point where it starts out very slowly and shoots up. That's when we're going to see significant displacement. And that's when I think we're going to see entrepreneurs take advantage of this workforce that's displaced, and will generally offer or will be open to lower paying jobs to get stuff done in a manual way that may be more cost effective than LLMs, or be repurposed in stuff that LLMs can't do. And someone's going to figure out how to utilize that population, or many people will utilize that population. I can guarantee it.
And then how about in the industry of insurance, and then with your business at Coterie?
I think most underwriters don't like me for my point of view on how generative AI will impact their jobs. So I think there's a lot of good that underwriters can do, but I think underwriters are and some actuaries are likely to have a lot of their work displaced by, and what I think the successful underwriter or actuary or insurance person in the future will realize is this, and it's something I've seen in chess. So the best chess player in the world can beat a computer sometimes. It's a tough fight, and I think they can make chess computers that can actually beat fairly regularly. But what they've noticed is a average good chess player and a computer can beat a computer every time. How does that
Interesting.
tell? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Says a lot about the future, maybe, right? It might be a leading
yes,
indicator.
exactly. And so now they actually have competitions where people and computers compete against other people and computers. And so it's actually like, okay, now that's an interesting way to think about it. And it gets our minds thinking, how do I work with this machine? How
Hmm.
can I make this a good relationship? Because they're not going away. If you think somehow you're going to be, like this is going to be a fad that goes away, that's ludicrous. It's a super efficient way of doing things. So I think the way that workers, not only in the insurance space, but also in other areas, we need to think about how can we become, this combination of both machine and human working together to achieve a purpose that's beneficial for our overall society. And if we have that mindset, a mindset that's willing to kind of humble ourselves and get better at a task that we're not as familiar with, then we'll be in a very good position, help our broader economy, and also selfishly preserve our jobs.
I'm going to skip around a little bit here. I want to go to the juxtaposition of the founder and the CEO roles. So you've been in business since 2018, probably looks a lot different than it did the first couple of years than it does the last couple of years. So something I'd like to ask about is that juxtaposition of innovation versus commercialization. So you're finding the product market fit. When's the right time to commercialize this product? This is truly what's going to scale and the market's going to buy. How have you gone through that? How has that process been? And where are you at in that process?
I think ours has been a little bit, sound truly boring, a little bit textbook in terms of figuring out the product market fit. And that's no smooth journey. If you look at, most people think about things more so from a macro standpoint or view results from a macro standpoint. And they see just like, oh, it just went up and to the right. You had such a nice little journey. This period that you're just glossing over where like it's just like sleepless nights. So yeah, finding product market fit, that takes a little bit of, pivoting here and there. The market has to realize, and then the flywheel starts. And that's nice. And my advice to anyone who's kind of in that part of it is sell pain pills, not vitamins, right? Like if your like thing is a nice to have, but it's not eliminating like pain in someone's life, you're never going to have product market fit. No one's going to like pay you tons of money and keep coming back to you for a supplement that they don't actually need. But if you're like eliminating pain and creating value immediately, you'll have to bat customers away with a stick. And that's what, and textbook, that's what we found. We basically had a really good product, but in one market, it was a vitamin, and another product, it was a pain pill. And all we had to do was just shift the focus. And that's what we did. And we found that, with our agent and broker partners, it was so much more of a pain pill for them than, let's say, a non-traditional partner. And that some non-traditional partners, it can be a pain pill, but it was generally a vitamin. It was a nice to have supplemental income. But man, in the agent broker space, it's such a big problem, this small commercial stuff. They had no efficiencies with it. It took them hours and hours and hours to get it done, and it kept coming in. So they wanted to make money off it, but they couldn't. So we had a pain pill for that. Then once we had that product market fit, we had to look at the business and say, okay, how do we make this, build a really good financial model off of it? And that's where I really think you transition from a founder to a CEO. And, founders are really good at like creating this idea and like, scrappily getting to product market fit. But then you have to switch over to a mindset that's probably much more pragmatic and disciplined and maybe even a little brutal at times and
Especially
make hard.
depending on someone's style and
Yes.
how hard it is to be the founder and then the CEO, which sorry, I'll
That,
let you finish your thought. That's what I'm going to ask next.
oh, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. A lot of founders can be they are charismatic, and switching to that style of like, hey, you've got to chop off people's heads and go to war. It's uncomfortable for a lot of founders. Then switching to that CEO position and finding out how you're going to make this really viable from a unit economic standpoint, and, run your company in a specific way, that can be difficult. Thankfully, we had a confluence of events that really helped us in a way. End of the happy Silicon Valley market, that was a powerful tailwind to go and be like a wartime CEO. And, we all the wartime CEO stuff, all the, Ben Horowitz type stuff. Yeah, but it was good. It was good. Don't get me wrong. I like The Hard Thing About Hard Things. It's a good book, but still, like, don't be too hyperbolic. Like, just run your company. And so those things helped us really get a handle on unit economics and other stuff. And that's, I think, one of the hardest things that you have to do post product market fit. Not resting on your laurels. You're going to constantly have to improve your company and constantly reevaluate where you are based on the stages that you're at.
Do you have any stories of when you realize you're going from product market fit to scaling? Was there ever anyone from the outside saying, hey, maybe we should bring in a professional CEO? How was that process? Is there a story around that?
Thankfully, well, I shouldn't say thankfully. My investors have yet to push on bringing in a new CEO or a professional CEO. They've always had confidence in me, maybe too much sometimes, but and there very well could be a day where Coterie is outside of my ability to lead. That's okay. I care far more about the well-being of this company than my name on anything. And so there absolutely been times within the company where individuals are not the right people to be leading from the product market fit stage to the more unit economic stage. And even I think it's extremely important for the CEO to make those decisions relatively quickly but thoughtfully. Just because you make it quickly doesn't mean you don't make it thoughtfully. And communicate to the person what's happening. Basically like, hey, look, you're really good here. This is not your strong suit. And so here are the options, right? And generally the best option is like, it's time for you to leave, right? Yeah. And that's okay. That's okay. Very rarely can you find another position in that company for the person to work in. It's usually not a fit. Still, that doesn't need to be a bad thing. People are good at certain things. Like you look at it like Marine, Army, Police, right? Some Marines should just be Marines. They don't want to go into the Army. They love running through the jungle, doing crazy stuff, sleeping in the open air. And then you have the Army. The Army comes in and has more coordinated, like less guerrilla type warfare. It's more of kind of like let's hold the territory that we have, set up areas and really protect these things. And then the police is the true like peacekeepers. Like, okay, we've conquered. Now let's just have people to kind of monitor and make sure everything stays good. Some of the Marines can become Army people. Some of the Army people can police people, but it's very rare to have every single person go from one to the other. And if some CEOs have problems with that, like they want to keep everyone together as this happy family throughout the whole thing, and that just can't happen. Some people can do it, but a lot of times it doesn't work.
How have you been able to evolve? What would be your advice to a founder to be able to make the transition from founder to CEO?
I think the biggest thing, and really this is not just with me or with founders and CEOs, I think it's really anything, is be humble enough to let go the things that worked. And great story that I think about is, I can't remember his name, but it was a Apple designer who set up all the Apple stores. He had this really, really great vision for how Apple stores could be. And it was beautiful. Every time you go into an Apple store, it's a gorgeous thing. But if you remember, he got hired by JCPenney's. And he attempted to just do the same thing for JCPenney. And it was a flop. It went terribly. And everyone at JCPenney thought like, oh, this guy's brilliant. He's gonna really save our stores. It's like, oh, it didn't work. So there's a great saying, right? It's like to a person with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You got to realize there's other tools in the tool belt, right? Not everything. A hammer is a great tool, but if I'm trying to cut my hair, I shouldn't use a hammer. Not great. And we see a lot of CEOs or a lot of leaders in any company who's like, this has worked so many times. I've seen it work so many times. Just trust me, this is going to work. And you're running a playbook that was excellent for playing soccer, but we're playing football. Not that kind of football. I know they sound similar, but yeah. And it's like the game has changed. We're not playing checkers anymore. This is chess. It's really great that you want to do all these like checkers type moves, but you got to understand that the game has evolved. This is a very different game now, and you can't just keep employing the same old tactics that you were doing.
Final question. I'm curious on the vision of Coterie.
I'll say it in two things. One is about people and one is about the kind of purpose. With respect to our purpose, there's this kind of massive group of underinsured population or uninsured population, especially in the small commercial space, because they've been heavily neglected. We really think by decreasing the uninsured population in the United States, at least, we can have a significant macroeconomic impact. Let's just think about your life in general, right? Like you have health insurance, I hope, I assume.
Thank you.
And so like, you and your kids are covered and you can go and play basketball, play football, whatever it is. And you don't really think about it. You can literally drive from one place to the other and you don't really have to think about like, man, if someone hit me or if I got hurt playing games, I may be out $50,000. You don't think about that. And so what you do is instead of having 50 to $100,000 always in your bank account, just in case you get hurt, you can employ that capital in a much higher ROI than like the 0.2% that you're getting in your savings account, right? And that creates large macroeconomics gains because everyone gets to do that. And we don't even think about it. We do not even think about that.
How many people and businesses are operating like that?
Exactly. About 50% are underinsured. Yeah.
Small businesses?
Small businesses. And it's even more.
You're underinsured?
Yes. And it's even more as the smaller you go.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, yeah. And so it's like you better have a huge nest egg.
Yeah.
Because it takes one person walking into your store and slipping and, you're in a liability suit or a disgruntled employee claiming, employment practices against you. So like there's a lot of problems with this. And a lot of times they're like trying to get insurance, but no one wants to cover them and no one wants to help them. The agents and brokers didn't really make much money. So like go somewhere else. And then they just forget about it. They stop. It's not a good thing. So by us changing how commercial insurance is done, literally, business name and address. That's all we need to know. We'll tell you yes or no. And that turns it from a 8-hour process of back and forth with an insurance company to less than a minute, and they literally have a policy in their inbox. Like that's what we really like. And so decreasing the uninsured population helps an overall macroeconomic improvement across the board. We're a big fan of that. And then with respect to the people, the company, we really want to create a company that full of, we describe ourselves as smart, energetic professionals who do the right thing, and we don't brag about it. We sometimes switch out professionals and nerds. We're like, we like read fantasy books. We're kind of like athletic nerds. There's a lot of us who are like really strong athletes, but also we're very nerdy. We read, Wheel of Time. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we like to Wheel of Time. We like all that kind of fun stuff, and we really, really get into what we do. We're heavy into making whatever we do, we want to do a good job at it.
That's awesome. Well, it sounds like you're building a pretty cool culture there.
Thanks. It's been good.
David, thanks so much for joining me today, telling me some personal stories in your entrepreneurial journey. Really cool stuff. I wish you all the best.
Chris, it's great being on.
Thanks, David.